Reflecting on the Democratic Labour Party's 69th annual conference held the 23rd to 25th of August 2024, Dr. Tennyson Joseph, an associate professor of political science at North Carolina Central University, surmised that the DLP faces a deep existential crisis and even possible extinction. Having lost a sister in my childhood and a father as a teen, that, coupled with pastoral experience, has made me familiar with death. The DLP annual conference conveyed a foreboding that we may be at the beginning of the end. Notwithstanding any belief in miracles, sometimes we hold to false hope, as with West Indies cricket. The grave wounds inflicted by island insularity and boardroom shenanigans appear terminal for our regional game. In terms of understanding the BLP influences on the current situation in the DLP, there are those who in the DLP view Dr. Ronnie Yearwood and comrade leader Ralph Thorne with suspicion. They perceive that, being part of the vanquishing of the DLP in 2008, their inveigling is simply a result of the political acts they both seek to personally grind with Miss Motley. However, I believe that all Barbadians, regardless of history, should be allowed to join any party once they subscribe to the philosophy of the institution and abide by its constitution, rules, and procedures. However, for many there remain the question of motive. Some feel this political transmutation by these two gentlemen may be another BLP ploy, allowing the latter to domineer the goings-on at George Street as they do with the media, private sector, trade unions, civil service, and other key actors. The current crisis in the DLP allows the BLP, which remains in election mode, to advance Motleyism, akin to Thatcherism, except mired in populism rather than rooted in ideology. As exemplified in the attempt to replace Independence Day with Republic Day, therein Barrow with Motley, ego is running amok. The concerns raised by Mr. Thorne on the conduct of the Barbados Police Service to impartially uphold law and order last week at George Street were legitimate, particularly when juxtaposed to the actions that took place in Deacon's on Good Friday 2020. The recent shootings of a 12-year-old girl by masked gunmen in Silver Hill typifies the failing of this government not only to deal with crime and violence, but the many social and economic ills facing our nation, including securing a future for our children and our children's children. I never expected that the wanton violence I experienced while living in Jamaica would reach our shores in Barbados. But this is what happens when politics is commingled with gangsterism. Understanding what the characteristics of previous DLP leadership on the party today is, we need to realize that while generally we are individually responsible for our successes and failures, and that as long as people principally blame others for why they aren't where they feel they should be, they will remain trapped. A monumental challenge to the DLP is its prevailing leadership style. Whereas the BLP was early on weaned off a cult of personality through a multiplicity of leaders, Grantley Adams, Hugh Cummings, Bui St. John, Tom Adams, and all those after, the DLP was fashioned around Errol Barrow. and Barrow's typification of what Carl Stone identified as a maximum leader became the DLP's default leadership trait. Erskine Sandiford tried unsuccessfully to replicate this style, leading to the formation of the National Democratic Party, the NDP, under Dr. Richie Haynes, and consequentially, the parliamentary no-confidence vote. David Thompson, mimicking his predecessors, neglected the opportunity to reintegrate the NDP, which was formed primarily of DLP members and supporters, and subsequently, aided by Owen Arthur's politics of inclusion, oversaw an exodus of a number of future leaders in the BLP over to the BLP. So what are the leadership options facing the party today? My perception of Dr. Yearwood's leadership competencies plummeted last weekend. The conduct by Steve Blackett in both action and word confirmed the Peter principle that persons rise to the level of their incompetence. But I expected better from Dr. Yearwood. His illegitimate presence at George Street and his association with those reputed to have commandeered the DLP's assets raised serious questions about his political acumen and ethics. There are three things I have complete and utter disdain for: hypocrisy, dishonesty, and tyranny. And notwithstanding the braying for justice by those supporting Messrs. Yearwood and Blackett, how could they expect justice when they sought to prove that might is right? A pervasive threat to democracy is a tyranny of the majority, that is, those who seek to use force or fraud to win elections or carry motions, as was attempted last Saturday. The Renegade group, in support of Messrs. Yearwood and Blackett, hijacked the DLP's annual conference and attempted to reinstate these expelled members without due process. Their actions, in contravention to the party's constitution and procedures, and highly disruptive, warranted their exclusion until they could guarantee that they can act in a manner proper and dignified. I commend Mr. Thorne as DLP leader for seeking to assemble a seemingly inclusive team, but some of his choices may confirm the suspicion that grey forces, relics of a recent vanquished past, are operating in the shadows. There remains the unresolved issue of the presidency. And should Mr. Thorne seek this for himself, it could reinforce the perception that actions against Messrs. Yearwood and Blackett were Machiavellian in nature. But if not him, then who? In seeking to understand the current state of the DLP, the 5 phases of party decline, blinded, inaction, faulty action, crisis, and disintegration, developed by Joseph Lench, a political contributor to The Economist and Financial Times, is useful. In phase 1, he talks about being blinded. In the first phase, things might not be looking up for the party, but nor are they looking particularly down either. The trend is stable. Problems, even any electoral underperformances, are largely attributed to be aberrations. A few lone voices call for reform and innovation, but mostly behind closed doors. The second phase is inaction, and in this phase, challenges may be identified but are not addressed, Performance-wise, the party is doing okay. Results are mixed. It could be worse. In this phase, leaders see risk to corrective action and, aware that conflict may accompany change, choose to retain the status quo. The party goes from stagnation into slow decline. Over time, internal and external pressures increase. The kettle starts to boil. The party leadership seems spurred into action. On the surface, things seem to be happening, but this is essentially participation theatre. That is, allowing disgruntled members and activists to vent without any meaningful change. Critics are listened to but not heard. Cynicism rises and morale plummets, and the party enters free fall. In phase 4, crisis, distress becomes visible. Substantial problems become public and cannot be ignored or argued away. Painful defeats at the polls are complemented by bad internal choices. Key persons begin to leave, and there is now an open critique from loyal stalwarts. Internal conflicts increasingly consume time and energy, which the media reports with relish. Leadership faces an increasing loss of credibility. Donations begin to dry up. A bunker mentality ensues. That is, instead of opening itself up, the leadership circle seals itself off by closing ranks. And finally, phase 5 is disintegration. The party center cannot hold and begins to break apart. The parliamentary party may start fighting with the central office. Local branches may disassociate themselves. Civil war ensues. Opinion leaders publicly declare the party to be ruling. Pundits call the situation existential. Paranoia takes hold of leaders. They see the enemy everywhere. An us versus them mentality is pervasive, which can go as far as, if I go down, you all go down with me. At this point, it's now all about power, not policy or polity. The polls are plummeting. The heart of the party stops beating. While in some cases, even at this stage, an emergency resuscitation, that is, a political defibrillator, may prove successful, in many other cases, it may be too late, and the party carries on as a zombie, a walking dead party, until it ultimately disintegrates. In concluding, noting the disappearance of Eric Gary's Grenada United Labour Party and Eugenia Charles's Dominica Freedom Party, Dr. Beckel warns that if the DLP does not resolve its post-election leadership crisis at the quickest possible time, the possibility of its extinction is very great. The DLP is at a crossroad, and the crucial decisions that need to be taken have a timeline. But democracy cannot succeed unless those who express their choice are prepared to choose wisely. If we delay a decision, the opportunity for resurrection may disappear forever, with national consequences, for the DLP has not just been a beacon for democracy, but the essential mechanism for social transformation in Barbados and the forging of the Caribbean community. There are those calling for a new political party to emerge, which I argue against, as I believe that third parties struggle in the Caribbean. However, an assertion was made that it may not be a third party that is being sought per se, but rather the emergence of a new legitimate second one. That caused me to pause. May God continue to bless and guide this wonderful island of ours, Barbados, and particularly at this time, our democracy and the DLP. I thank you.